G'day everyone, Harvey here from the Perth YP podcast. Joining me today is Travis Thomas, co-founding managing director of Team Buffalo. He's an impressive young professional who's moved out to Perth with his wife from the US, and he's set up his own consulting business. Let's check in with him to learn about his career, his journey, and how we can all improve based on his background. Thanks for joining me.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
It's been a couple of weeks since we caught up last, and I know we were just catching up after the first time we met, which was at the Perth YP Sundowner, end of financial year Sundowner. So maybe I'll get your thoughts on that. From a Perth YP perspective.
Yeah.
What did you think of the Sundowner, and what can we do better in the future?
Yeah. I think it was a great event. I think I hadn't seen that many accountants in one space in a while. Not that that's a good or a bad thing. No, it was great. A good group of enthusiastic people and quite a diverse group in terms of where they are in their career and what they're focused on. I found that to be quite fascinating. And some people just getting started or trying to figure out what their next career shift would be. Some were literally on the edge of like, all right, I'm leaving my first career. I'm now on to my second one, which is always an interesting transition.
Yeah, there's that common fact or saying that, people of the more recent generations are going to change their career, 7 times across their life.
Yep.
And I was actually counting how many times have I changed my career, and it's been 3 times already. So I'm halfway there.
Yeah.
And
Pace
that's
yourself.
Yeah. That's a scary thought actually when I reflect on it. I've already changed 3 times, and it's probably been, 5 years.
Yeah. Yeah. And you would ask the question, I imagine, how much of the job you do today even existed when you did your first career? And the same would be true for your 5th one after you change again. That might not even exist yet.
Exactly. So, I suppose that's a good segue into your background and into, your career. Do you want to introduce yourself to our listeners and give us a bit of a recap in terms of your background and where you've come from?
Yep. So I'm Travis Thomas, managing director and founder of Team Buffalo. So we are a people-centered growth consulting firm. So a little bit different than what you would traditionally think of in the consulting space. Started my career back at a Fortune 500 top 5 company, United Health Group, which I found out the other day employs 270,000 people globally,
Wow.
Which is just an astronomical number of people. I don't remember it being that many when I was there.
Jeez.
Yeah.
I came from a similar size company.
Yeah.
Well, I do actually at EY, and we've got about 300k people.
Yeah, it's just nuts.
And before that, my previous employer was like 450k.
Wow.
And it's unbelievable.
Yeah. So you look at that, and then you look at the capital at their disposal. And so my background actually in that was I started on the front lines taking calls like angry physicians and hospitals as I was doing my bachelor, and then got moved up pretty quickly through the ranks to the point of ops manager across a few call centers. And they put me through Greenbelt training, which for anyone who remembers Six Sigma and Lean Six Sigma, they had a green belt in every division because it was an effective way to reduce costs without having to employ specialists just in that area. So we had to do our day job and find operational improvements to optimize, as always.
And that's kind of the flavor of the month, or the flavor of the year, I suppose, is how do we improve our processes?
Yeah.
So we can squeeze a little more out of the bottom line at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Okay, so you started off there, and what caused you to change? So you finished your bachelor's. Your bachelor's was in
psychology.
Okay.
Which no one ever becomes a psychologist after doing.
Very few people.
They don't tell you that.
Exactly. So what led you down the path that you took at that point?
Yeah. Yeah, so I finished. Well, I got into the call center role in the middle of my studies. Came from a pretty rough background and was supporting myself through college, working 3 jobs. So doing, 1 full time, 2 part time, while doing a full course load. So I finished all of that studies and scraped by at the end, and just decided, okay, the career prospects look pretty good here. The economy wasn't amazing. We're talking 2008 was when I graduated.
Wow, yeah, that's not...
from bachelor's.
You don't want to be graduating then.
No, so the prospects were pretty terrible across the board. And I thought actually this company's on the growth side because it's a health company, health insurance, and it just had amazing double-digit growth every year. So I went, okay, we'll stick around here. And they rewarded my kind of working more. My peers, I won't name any names, but had settled into kind of the standard 40-hour work week, which is fine, met their lifestyle. But I was like, no, I'm here. I do what it takes, and I get done the extra projects no one else wanted to do. And by doing that, got recognized early on and promoted by the VP. There's always some VP doing something, right?
Yeah, okay. So that's awesome. That little tidbit there of picking up things that perhaps other people don't want to do.
Yeah.
Or maybe it's a little too challenging.
Yep.
So maybe we dig deeper into that.
Yeah.
And just understand, what was your psychology, if I will, into making that decision, saying, okay, no one else is picking this up. What made you think that you could pick it up?
I think one of the biggest problems I see, even with the leaders I work with today through our consulting and coaching arm, is this lack of backing yourself and just willingness to have a go. And that's usually coupled with some fear of appearing inadequate amongst your peers. My peers weren't rock stars in and of their own right. So, and I actually had an amazing mentor. I have to say, I know people talk about the power of mentors, but I think that's grossly underestimated. It's very rare for a person to be successful in and of themselves just purely through motivation. You can do it, but if you look at the greats, most of them have had some mentor along the way. I was listening to Arnold Schwarzenegger the other day talking about his start, and everyone keeps saying he's a self-made man, and he has a real issue with that because he says, my first apartment in California was provided by a pro bodybuilder. He paid for my first year of my apartment, and then when I went into my first comp, they paid for the flights. He's like, I wouldn't have, as great as I am, I wouldn't have made it. He's like, I had the potential, but you need support around you. And so for me, I had a really strong female mentor who was just like, look, you're surrounded by mediocrity. You choose what to do in that situation. And you can either step into the things no one else wants to do, or you can just fit in with the rest of the pack. And I was not prepared to fit in with the rest of the pack because I didn't want, you look forward your next 7 careers. And if they're that same thing for 40 hours a week, I think it wouldn't have been a good ending.
Agreed. I think that's really invaluable advice. To back yourself is something that I learned early on, and whether it might be coupled with a bit of ignorance from my end to not know what I'm really getting myself into.
That's healthy.
But sometimes I just go for it and I say, I'll do my best and see what happens. And more often than not, it turns out all right. Like the fear of failure is a serious inhibitor. But I think you just got to say to yourself, not today. Not today. I'm gonna try this.
Yeah.
So that's interesting. And circling back to that Arnold Schwarzenegger comment. I mean, I'm a fan of his and his career, I suppose. And I've heard one of his speeches where he says, you can't climb the ladder of success with your hands in your pocket. So you really have to go and do something. And it shines through in your example where you've actually gone and done something rather than stuck with the rest of the pack and your regular responsibilities. So that's an interesting approach. And I think sometimes you do have to just step out of that and say, look, I know what I'm doing is slightly different to what everyone else is doing, but there's value in it.
Yeah. Yeah, and you have to be able to, or willing within yourself to forego the short-term gains. I see that a lot. One of the litmus tests for me in that scenario, going through that, was a project would come up and it would get put on the table with, I had 11 peers, I think it was, within the group, and they would say, okay, is this a promotion? Would I get a promotion from this? Nope. Will I get recognition for this? Probably not. Will I get extra pay for it? Nope. Then why the hell would I do it?
Yeah.
And then I go, well, great, sign me up.
Yeah, okay.
And then they'd go, well, that guy's an idiot. Like, look at, and I had one of them say it to me, like, that's quite stupid to take that project on because they're not going to take any of your current load off of you. And I went, yeah, but it puts me up front of the people I need to be in the room with.
Exactly. There's more to it than just pay.
Yeah. Yeah.
You're creating a connection.
Yes.
You're creating FaceTime. You're getting FaceTime with people that you wouldn't normally get. And I think that's really critical as well. Critical to growth, developing your brand. And that's how more opportunities come about as well. There's quite often you have to invest your own time into, say, a freebie, quote unquote freebie, but quite a lot can come out of that. So you don't know what will come out, but potentially quite a lot could, if you shake the tree, could fall out.
Yeah, and you have to give. I think if you talk about leaders, one of the problems I see is there's not this willingness to give without intent of receiving back. It's you have to give, and I do that all. I just got someone the next job in their career purely because I met the person, thought they were great, called another CEO I knew. This was last week, and got them a job. But I don't need anything out of that. It was purely, this guy has talent and I think he'd be a good fit for someone else I know. But meeting with someone you have no need to meet with, a lot of people would go, actually, I don't have time, go away. And I said, no, sure, I'm happy to meet with you, give you an hour of my time. The first cup of coffee is like always fine. After that, we might have to look at, okay, does this make sense? Are we wasting each other's time? But you just see that as so rare around nowadays, particularly with people who have perceived power or status.
Yeah, that's really spot on. I think exactly, that's so spot on. I think even taking the time once a week to meet with people that you don't necessarily see any quote unquote value or immediate value, you don't know what values you might get out of it.
Yeah,
you actually don't know. You're prejudging that. Now, for the listeners, you would have detected a slight accent.
Yes.
A slight accent. To circle back to your early days, I presume the US.
Yeah, you got it.
And tell us a bit about the differences between growing up in the US and coming out here in Australia, the working life in Australia. What's the differences, and are there any similarities?
That's a big question, hey? I talk to people here and they say, you definitely sound American. I talk to people in the US, they say, you sound like something's happened to your voice. So it's starting to wash away. I've been here just over 7 years now. There are massive differences, I think, really massive differences, some of them for better, some of them for worse. Going back to the background, I came from a pretty rough upbringing and really low socioeconomic side, and my parents split up when I was 10, so my mother ended up in a same-sex marriage, which was great because then I grew up in a multiracial same-sex marriage household, which was really good for, if you can grow up in that, then anywhere you go, nothing phases you. And they're like, oh, that's a bit unconventional. And I see things like, nope, that doesn't bother me. And so I have found coming to Perth that there is a lot of sameness, but that I can live with that as well. The work-life balance is a huge difference here. I find in general, I think you and I are probably more workaholics than the normal side, and probably people listening to this would be more workaholics. But I really love what I do, and I'll put everything into it. And if I've signed up for it, why would I switch off? From 8:30 to 4, and I'm out of here after my half-hour lunch. I would feel unfulfilled by doing that. There is a dark side of that in the U.S., and I have found it can be. I was working absolutely ridiculous hours for something I didn't believe in because I was part of the corporate regime, and that wasn't particular to that company. I just saw that across the spectrum. So it's finding that balance, right? I think Perth is pretty amazing. I think you look at the news, and the worst case scenario here is someone drove through a roundabout and crashed into someone's home at night. And you're like, oh, yeah, that's not great. But also how great is that's the big highlight from the night before.
Sure.
Yeah. Whereas, in the US it can be, mass shootings and stuff that just, it's horrible. you wouldn't want that to happen anywhere.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Okay. Well, that's a drastic contrast. But if we were to look at, say the economy and the state of the economy, if you would compare your hometown,
Yep.
the major city in your hometown or your home state,
Yep.
to Perth, how would you compare that?
Yeah, it's pretty dismal. So I grew up in Kissimmee. That's my hometown, which no one would really know. That's where Disney actually is. Like Orlando, Kissimmee, it spills onto Kissimmee. Kissimmee was, at the last I checked, 80 to 90% tourism driven.
Wow.
And you talk about a number of minimum wage jobs, all in retail or hospitality, all tip based, gratuity based, $2 an hour, $3 an hour plus gratuities, and while Disney remains relatively impervious to that, the spill-on tourism is not doing as well. That was an interesting difference in economy, and even I think, economically, if the current president, who I won't say anything else about, is causing lots of issues economically for everyone, really. Just getting into certain fights that probably aren't to anyone's detriment, and some of those conversations do need to be had, and I hate the political side of stuff, but it's are we thinking short term, are we thinking long term, are we we've exited the not we, I'm Australian now, like going through citizenship.
You're an Aussie.
Yeah, Aussie. Yeah. But there is this exit from climate change as a concern. And you go, how can we, how can that be acceptable given where we are, everything we know, all the empirical evidence? And we go, no, we're not prepared to have the climate change conversation. And actually, let's incentivize behaviors that are going to get us in the right direction.
Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I think climate change is such a hot topic, and it's such a polarizing topic as well, where I feel that most of the younger generations are pretty much to one end of the spectrum.
Yeah.
And the sentiment is pretty consistent. But none of us are in positions of power to make drastic changes.
Yeah.
So we're left with this. We're pretty much left with no other option. We can protest, we can lobby, and do all of that sort of stuff, which is great. But beyond that, I don't know. Maybe it's maybe it's 10 years till we really get some traction on that sort of thing. Maybe in 10 years it's too late.
Yeah.
I have a feeling that we're pretty much borderline too late already.
Yeah, definitely.
So who knows at this point?
Yeah, which is why one of my idols, for his good and his bad, Elon Musk, is quite interesting, because he goes, look, I think if you really get into his position on things, he thinks we're too far gone and that we need to get off this planet.
We need to leave, guys, as soon as possible.
Yeah, and everything he's doing is, across the spectrum, Tesla and everything else is all about creating technology that enables us to build a colony on Mars. He's like, we have to get off the planet because I think we've missed the window. And you talk about kind of visionary leadership, for good or for bad. He has a clear vision, and he thinks, and he said a number of times his plan is to die on a colony on Mars with 10,000 other people, like at a minimum. So that's a pretty clear vision for the future that says where he thinks things are.
So coming back, I think you touched on something really interesting there, is the visionary leadership.
Yeah.
And with the stuff that you do day to day, how important is having a clear, concise vision that everyone's across, that it's been communicated, and perhaps people have been consulted on?
Yeah.
I think that's common in all organizations. If you can unite everyone towards one simple vision, that can be incredibly powerful. Have you come across times where this hasn't happened, and then what's the fallout from there?
Yeah, I think there's a challenging double-edged sword in the vision, right? It's like, are we uniting people against or for a worthy cause? Are we uniting people of shared values around a cause that isn't actually good for anyone? You look at Enron, you had a pretty consistent vision shared across a number of employees and shareholders for optimizing at all costs, to the point where they shut off a power grid and killed people. Like that, I mean, that's what, if you haven't seen it, The Smartest Guys in the Room is an amazing documentary on the power of a really corrupt vision to lead people. It was a solid vision. It was well executed, but it was dark, right? So you would say, actually, from that paradigm alone, he was an effective leader. But you have to look at then, societally, and that's where they're a bit antiquated, but triple bottom line become important, purpose, profits, and the kind of people and environment side of stuff. Are we really looking after all aspects of who we are? And that's why when I set up Buffalo, I set it up as a social enterprise. So we give back on everything we do. We only work with companies that look at how are they impacting the world. And it doesn't mean you have to be perfect. It just means your intent has to be relatively aligned to where society thinks we need to go. So we're not going to work with companies who are out to just, I'm not going to say anything because I start saying stuff and then I get into trouble.
Well, I think we get the idea, right?
Yeah.
I think that's really awesome that you guys are giving back. So let's talk about the Perth community and some of the stuff that Buffalo does for the Perth community. Do you want to fill us all in?
Yep. So there's what we do with leaders to help foster that across the board, and I think that becomes exponential. And then there's also what we do in terms of giving back. So I'll start with the first one. We work across kind of 5 main areas in businesses or any organization, really. And the first, as you kind of alluded to, is identity. Like, who are you as an actual organization, a team, and a leader? What's your vision, values, and your purpose? And if I go into your organization, because it's funny, you walk in, and I can tell you 2/3 of my clients, I walk in and it's painted on a wall somewhere, and meanwhile there's a body on the floor. And I'm like, what happened to Joe? And they're like, we don't talk about that. And I say, all right, that's probably not a good indication. But you come in and you start stress testing that. And one of the things I love to do is work up a scenario with the CEO, and I go, now you can't say anything. Let's give it to your executive team and see what decisions they make. And immediately you become really clear on how real these values and behaviors are and how clear the vision is versus their interpretation of the vision and values. And then we start looking at how do we fix that. So that's one area, but you have to start with that, because if it's not right, it shows up everywhere else. And there's a real cost to that. People think you can't quantify people, but Gallup, Burson, there's heaps of reports on this stuff. You guys would have heaps of data on people metrics and the real implication of getting it wrong. The cost of a new hire is about 2.5 times their first salary. So you go, ouch, like I just lost Joe. He's still on the floor. Everyone's pretending he's not there. And we're going to go hire another Joe at 2.5 times the salary. And you go, that's madness. So we look at that as a clear driver.
Yeah, exactly. And that's so important, is the retention of people. If you don't retain your people, it's such a costly affair to and not to mention it takes so much time to actually find the right person.
Oh, yep.
And in that time, you're hemorrhaging. You'll lose the rest of your team is short staffed. They're working overtime. It can snowball very quickly.
Yep, definitely.
So that's a real interesting scenario, and I think most leaders are semi-aware, but whether it really drives their decisions, perhaps not.
Yeah, and it's a hard battle to fight between the board's requirements or shareholders' requirements. And sometimes with them being the single owner, you see this still for short-term gains, which we've kind of talked about already, versus going to where they think as an organization they want to go in the long term, the vision. And so there's this constant trade-off between short-term, foregoing short-term for long-term. And you can do both. It just requires a fair bit of effort. But you can see why, as one area we work in, that would be the first place to start.
Yep.
And then in terms of giving back, the second side of that question is we've partnered with an organization called Project Rocket. So I think social enterprises come in multiple models. One of my postgrad degrees was in social impact at UWA. And that is very much around how do you, as an organization, drive outcomes consciously, not just waiting or not just writing a check once a year, but actually how do we make sure that we've partnered with someone who is going to see out the benefits. And Project Rocket is a organization that's helping to educate kids in WA schools on bullying and how to deal with bullying through the lens of what are my values. Starting with values and vision. So you go perfectly aligned. They actually didn't have much of a presence in WA. They're predominantly on the East Coast.
Sure.
And so we agreed that for every hour of consulting we do, we give a program back into schools. For individual kids, that gives them a 1 year access to this online program that helps them assess their values, and they can access it at any time.
Awesome.
Yeah, so
That's great.
We'll keep doing that. And we look like we're on track to do a couple hundred kids in our first quarter. So that's
impressive.
Yeah.
That's impressive. Well done on that.
Thanks.
Now, I might add, we're here today in the Riff studio, the podcast studio at Space Cubed.
It's very flash.
It's very, very nice.
Yeah.
And I do have to thank the lovely staff and organisers here who have let me use this studio. So shout out to Lauren and Jordan, of course. Now, if we take a little step back into step away from your professional background, let's talk about you today, the person you are today, the professional, the leader you are today. What drives you when you wake up in the morning? What gets you out of bed?
Yeah, I think I've seen with our generation and the generation before ours and the one that's coming after, this kind of broken promise of you go to uni and then you go into a field and it's going to be perfect, and there's this stability that comes with that. And I wouldn't blame any particular person from that. And then I look at, well, what can we affect? What can we meaningfully affect in that? We can affect how people interact with the world and people around them, and we can affect the types of organizations that people choose to build in that context. And we see that companies that last longer have powerful purpose, have powerful leadership, and invest in their people. Like, those are pretty clear indicators. I mean, there was a massive shift on that. I would lie if I said I could remember the name, but there's a big CEO working group in the US that kind of sets trends on what's going to happen. And they've all agreed that actually the people and the societal elements have to come back onto the agenda, and they have to be drivers of where we go. So for me, my passion is all about building better people to the point where, and not that I have the blueprint, but just that I ask questions and I help facilitate stuff based on what I've seen. And my wife often tells me, you have to stop trying to fix people. She's like, they don't want help. I'm like, I'm not trying to help them. I'm just asking the questions. She's like, stop asking questions. Because I've seen it, right? We've all worked in companies where you go, this is the worst place. Like, I don't want to be here. I'm not happy. I'm actively disengaged. Some people are quite destructive in the workplace because they hate it. People have built their empires. And I go, we deserve better. Where people show up to work and they want better for everyone. So why not help build places that do that? And then if someone doesn't genuinely want that, we tend not to work with them for very long because they tell me I'm too crazy, and that's not what they've signed up for.
Okay. Well, that sounds like you've got that down pat. You've understood what drives you, and you've discovered that, and you've kind of built your career around that. So how did you get to that point where you reflected on what you want, and what you're passionate about, perhaps? Maybe not everyone is in the position to start their own consulting firm, but maybe you can shed some light in terms of how you found your passion.
Yeah, and I would say I probably wasn't in the position either, but you just go for it. You're never ready, right? Like, that's the fear thing. Is it now a good time? Nope, I'll do it. And as we're on economic brink, we go, okay, I'll just leave and start a new business. What did it for me really is, like I said, I would never use that as an reason for something happening on its own, but I came from a pretty bad upbringing that yeah, it was not easy to live through, had lots of domestic challenges and things that really affected most of the kids in the home. We had a lot of people going to prison. We just had stuff not really good in the home. And I thought, okay, well, surely if I go to uni and do the things they tell me to do, it'll be better. And then I got into the workplace and it wasn't better. And I was like, okay, this isn't great. And, I was on my own, and I left when I was 18 or whatever it was, and just with the clothes on my back. And I had to put myself through school because in the US, there's no HECS. So, which is a different thing. So you talk about differences. That's not a positive one. But then I thought, okay, I'll go for my next career. Tore out my shoulder. I was going to be a cop. Tore out my shoulder. That was off the cards. And so I think I went through a number of failed careers. Was going to be a lawyer. Was going to be a cop. Was going to be a psychologist. Went through all of that. And then I just said, well, actually, if I can't be those things, I do enjoy working with humans. And how can what do I like about humans? And it's like unlocking human potential and finding the best part of humanity. And then giving back myself, for the last X number of years, I've been on not-for-profit boards, unpaid. I'm on one now. I just got voluntold that I was going to be vice chairman. so I've stepped into that. Thanks, Lenny. At really purpose-driven organizations that have very little but want to make a difference to the world. And I think when you start doing that, you become really clear on what matters to you and what doesn't matter to you. And then you can choose, right? If you don't care about a certain cause, don't back that cause, but find something where you can put your fingerprints on it and say, actually, I was part of building something that made the world a better place.
Putting your fingerprints on something that contributes to making the world a better place and reflecting on, is this important or is this not important? I think that's two of the most critical questions you need to ask in almost everything that you do.
Definitely.
And we probably don't ask that. At least I don't. I definitely don't ask that every time I make a decision. So I think that's really, really poignant. And I think that's really great advice for our listeners. Something I've been asking most of my guests is, your first part of your day. What does that look like? You wake up, you get to work. Let's say up to the point where you wake up to the point where you've spent 30 minutes at work. Mm-hmm. What's that process like every day? Is it the same every day, or does it vary? I mean,
Yeah, for me, it's varied. I wish I could tell you.
Sure.
I've read the Morning Miracle stuff, and I'm like, yeah, I wish I could give you that. As you're saying, I'm like, I would love to give him that answer, but that'd be completely false.
Yeah, correct.
On a good day, you wake up relatively around the same time, sometimes 5:30-ish, really, and get up and go to the gym. I'd say that happens once or twice a week during the week, and then on the weekends. Realistically, I wake up after having worked pretty crazy hours. When you're trying to build your business, it's
Sure.
an unbelievable amount of effort to create that flywheel effect where the momentum grows. But get up at about 5:30. Get showered, get ready, make the coffee, and then just go through my diary. What's going up? What do I want to achieve out of going through today? I think I don't always ask myself that, but when I do, I realize the difference by the end of the day. You go like, I've got this stuff in my diary, but what's the intention? Like, what would success look like by the end of today if I went through and did these things? And if it's a bunch of meetings that aren't going to result in anything, maybe I should fix that before I end up at the end of the day. And then as I hit the car, I load up because I've got a relatively decent commute, about 45 minutes to an hour, because I'm one of the crazy people who lives up north. And I will put on usually Impact Theory is what I've had on lately and played. It's not a podcast, but he does it as a YouTube video and you just put it on audio only. And that's with Tom Bilyeu, and he interviews really interesting people. Far more interesting than me. And but he gets them to talk about the deep stuff. Like if you've written a book, he doesn't care about the book. He'll allude to it, but he really wants to understand like what are the deep drivers of human performance and human achievement. And I think that's a great way for me to start my day, because I go, well, what do I want to achieve? What struggles have other people faced? And then like, what am I going to do to affect that today? So I usually get to the office by then like supercharged.
Yeah.
Because you go like, I've looked at my day, I've tried to set my intention, and then I've just heard rock stars talking to each other who actually achieve meaningful stuff. And then now I'm into work, and then I'm getting right into my projects or whatever it is.
Okay. That's really interesting that there's almost like a lead up to your work day.
Definitely.
that gets you into the right zone, thinking the right way. And there's also some reflection before even that runway, before you get onto that runway, before you really take off for the day. So I think that's something that I probably have been a bit slack on, and could definitely do more of. I think it's the waking up early that I struggle with.
Yeah.
But
You're not alone.
yeah, but you know what? If you really want to grow, you got to do it. There's probably other ways to success, but I think a lot of people getting up early and reflecting, doing something for yourself, and then going to your work day does seem to breed some successful people.
Yeah.
You know, speaking of, interesting conversations and the deeper levels of the human state, perhaps. I don't know if you've read this book. I just started getting into it. It's called *Sapiens: A Brief History of Humankind*.
I haven't. It's on my to-read list. Yes.
And
it's a good.
yeah, it's amazing, and the author, I don't want to mispronounce his name, but he's a wonderful author, and one of the key points that he discusses is, what makes us different to chimpanzees or elephants or ants, humans as humans, Homo sapiens, is that one, that we work together. But chimpanzees, elephants, they all work together. But the difference between that is that their relationships are based on deep interpersonal connections. They will not cooperate with someone outside of their tribe, regardless. And of course, the opposable thumbs.
Yeah.
That's let's just, the physical attributes aside. Let's talk philosophically. And he says, the reason that we are the dominant species on the globe, across the globe, is that we have imagination, and two, we're storytellers. And through those two things, the connection between those two things is uniting people through a story into one particular cause.
Yeah.
Whether you know them or not. If you look at currency and money, it only works if we all believe in money.
Yeah.
And this is what he talks about, right? I don't want to go too far into the book because I want you to read it.
Yeah.
But that's the reason why we're the dominant species, is because we can unite people and unite together to cooperate with people that we have no connection with, we've never met before, but we're unified under certain set of common beliefs.
Yeah.
And that's what kind of feeds into the whole vision, the whole identity point that you were making earlier.
Yeah.
So, fundamentally as humans, we are looking for, perhaps our success is all driven by how you can unite each other, how we can unite each other for whatever common purpose.
Yeah.
And like you said, it should be a good purpose.
Yeah.
Ideally, it's a good purpose, because that's for progress.
Yeah. A hammer is a hammer. You can choose to hit someone with it, or you can choose to build a home with it.
Exactly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Exactly. So that's an interesting reflection.
I like that. Just on that, if I can.
Yeah.
I got asked. I'm giving a talk to a couple hundred CEOs for the CEO Institute in February, and I got asked to talk about millennials, and as you do. And one of the things was, one of the insights or questions was actually, why are millennials like so quick to leave their job? Why will they just pack up their things and go without telling anyone, or just decide that they've had enough? And I think you hit on a number of points that align to that. And that was the exact conversation I had, was that money isn't as valuable as it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. Take out volatility, right? Currency volatility is all over the place. We know that there's debts that are never going to be paid. We've got all these problems. Park that, but it is a factor. And then you look at actually like what's the affinity of the current generation. Of our generation, we're on the tail end of it, but and the one coming after it is there's not this massive pursuit of crazy possessions. It's actually purpose, and it might not be good or bad, but there is a purpose driving it. And I think we're seeing more of that. And the knock-on effect is this rift between, well, why do these people just leave when before people would stay in a job they hated for 40 or 50 years? Like, well, you've taken away the security, there's volatility everywhere, and I don't want the things that I used to buy with that money that previous generations bought. And I don't buy your vision as a leader. Or you're selling me a vision and then your behaviors don't align to it. So you're right. Like if you can't tell a story and then live that story, then people go, I'm out of here. Like I'll go find someone who will, or I'll go start my own version of that story.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And that storytelling element has been probably a buzzword, if not a flavor of the month as well in business circles.
Definitely.
But that's what Apple was built on.
Yep.
It's a story.
Yep.
And that's just proof. That's just proof. And the loyalty that comes with that story is a lot to be reckoned with.
Yep. Yep.
So we talked about, creating this vision and communicating this vision, and good leaders having a clear vision and communicating that. But let's unpack the leader itself. He or she, what are the key components or key things that make a good leader in your mind?
Yeah, it's an interesting mix. So I think definitely you've hit on the kind of purpose and vision side of it. And I think it's purpose including and beyond self. So if I leave, would I be happy for this thing to still exist and continue to achieve its mission? And I think that's hard for some leaders to say, yeah, I would be okay if this continued to go on its own and was growing and doing well, because the ego is so heavily attached to it. And then you go, well, that's not the purpose. That's your purpose. What's the purpose of the organization? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
And that can be quite different, right? We talked about giving without expectations. For me, that's something that every leader should do, because that instills within the organization the sense of that we have abundance and not operating from that scarcity mindset. You might have competition on your heels all the time, but they're doing that, right? They're acting like everything matters to the cent, the absolute cent. And you go, actually, it doesn't. And people pick that up, your stakeholders pick it up, and your people pick it up, and they go, we know it matters, and actually we'll do a better job because of that. They need to be facilitators of outcomes, but not say exactly what those outcomes have to be all the time. I think if you can, there's a great number of CEOs who've said you should hire people who are smarter than you and then get the crap out of their way that lets them do what they set out to do.
Sure.
Yeah, and removing barriers and unlocking potential has to be. And that's why leader as coach is an emerging trend. And there's really good data to show that effective leaders as coaches can achieve far more than command and control leaders who say, here's the order, go do it. And it's like, well, we're not on the battlefield. If you're in the battlefield, yeah, you have to make those calls. But actually, that's not reality. And stop pretending we're like on a ship fighting for our lives. We're not in that regard.
That's interesting that you mentioned the battlefield. I've been listening to a couple of different podcasts, but one in particular, Jocko Willink.
Oh yes, yeah.
Who's an ex-Navy SEAL and plenty of battlefield experience. But he crosses. He talks about the overlap between his leadership in the battlefield and the corporate leadership, and one of the things that he talks about is humility. In leaders, and keeping that ego aside.
Yeah.
Because in the battlefield, perhaps the ego gets everyone killed.
Yeah.
And not to that drastic extent in a corporate world, but the ego can sink a company.
And it does.
It can and does.
Yeah.
And it also affects retention, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So humility for me, I think, is big.
Yeah, definitely. And you can't be a good facilitator or coach without humility. It's impossible. So we've all had facilitators. You would have had facilitators come into workshops you've been in, and they start asking questions, and then they assert their own answer once everyone's spoken. You're like, well, that's not really how this is meant to work. Like, you're just using this as a platform, and you get to now sit at the front of the room and pretend you're facilitating.
Exactly, and you get a little pat on the back.
Yes. Yeah.
And it kind of backfires, right?
Yeah.
Because it leaves everyone kind of leaves thinking, well, that was a waste of time, one, and two, is this everyone's shared vision or is this just your vision?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's really dangerous.
Yep.
All right. Well, I think we've covered a lot from that end in terms of leaders, organizational values, and the importance of people. If you were to reflect on your career for the last 5 to 10 years, what would you tell a younger Travis?
I think it doesn't get easier, but it gets better.
Okay.
Yeah. And
Sure.
and I can probably qualify that if that's helpful.
Yes. I mean, I think as soon as you said that, it kind of triggers something that I always say to myself, and, life doesn't get any easier, but you just get better at life.
Yes.
You get better at coping with it.
Yeah.
So in that sense, is that similar to what you were saying?
Yeah, definitely. And you pick up skills and you build your network and you get access to more resources, both in terms of your network and your career progression. So it doesn't if you talk to most people, unless they're stuck in the past, they're always at the most difficult point in their life.
Yeah, you're right. You're right.
And then 10 years from now, that's more difficult than it was today.
Of course.
Because we're present. And as much as the stories are there, we're always present with what we're doing. And that's the most challenging thing. But then I think there's tools you can do around that, like effective journaling, to just go back through your journal and look at what actually was happening, and then where am I today? Oh, that's a lot easier. But I think, it doesn't, if I look back and said that to myself 10 years ago, where I was probably at the worst part of my life, like I said, with everything that was going on, I would definitely say it doesn't get easier, but it gets better.
Well, that's awesome. That's awesome advice. The last thing that I really wanted to cover off is for our listeners. If you were to give them some advice on future skills that they should foster, industries that they should keep an eye out for, or things that they should invest their time in. It might be reading more books. It might be networking more. But what advice would you give our listeners in terms of future skills to develop and investing their time wisely?
I think there's an interesting trend at the moment for people like dogging on books and dogging on universities and saying don't do I think there's a saying in the geeky side of things that only the Sith deal in absolutes. So, and some of you will get that, others will go get them out of here. But I think that's a problem, is people are telling people what they should be doing. But I definitely think that you can never read too much, right? You pick what you're going to do something about it. I see that a lot. People will read 4 books a month, and then I go, what did you do differently as a result of it? And tell me what the main takeaway from that was. Because once you get the punchline, you can read half the book, but what do you actually do about it? So I think learn something and then apply it, and then commit to that thing you're going to do. Skills, emotional intelligence has to be one of them. I think that it's shocking to me the number of people who are coming into their leadership roles for the first time, or just have really low level leadership capability, because they just can't talk to people. They can't convince people to buy into your vision and your story, as you alluded to. And it's because they don't know how to communicate. And as much as technology and automation will come in, and it is, one of the last things to go will be how we manage other people, right? Because technology doesn't, Siri tells me what to do and I tell her to go away because she didn't say it in a nice way. And like, don't yell at me, I'm already frustrated. And Alexa just says, okay. She never says thank you anymore.
That I'm grateful, Alexa.
Yeah. So it's that kind of EQ I think is important. People leadership. I think systems thinking is an interesting thing people don't speak about too much, but it's the ability to look at what's the interplay between seemingly random characteristics of an ecosystem. If we pull a lever on the left side, why does something fire in the right corner? And it's being able to look at that and then synthesize where you think things are going. And when we look at wicked problems like climate change, you need to be able to look at the whole system, not point your finger at a particular resource company or an industry and go, it's your fault, because that's not true.
Yeah,
but I think
okay.
we're simple creatures by default, and thinking critically is a difficult skill, and it makes our brain hurt. So, but if you can equip yourself in systems thinking, you can go, actually, I need to understand the parts that make up all the subsystems, and then I can start looking for symptoms of the problem and come up with theories to test.
Well, that's a lot to leave it on. I think that's really valuable advice.
Thanks.
And, Travis, I really appreciate your time. I think this has been invaluable for myself, for the listeners, and I'm sure I'll have you on very soon.
Great.
So I really appreciate it, and thanks for joining me today.
Thanks for having me. It was fun.
Thanks for listening to the Perth YP podcast. You can find more episodes on our YouTube and LinkedIn pages at Perth YP. Until next time, keep listening, keep growing, and keep connecting.